Hello, this is Kenda-Ruth, and we are going live with the topic of detachment in midlife crisis for left behind spouses. I'm Kenda-Ruth. I am the owner and founder of Midlife Crisis Marriage Advocate, and welcome to today's Facebook Live. You've sent me your questions. Thank you very much. We're going to go over a few of those questions. We're going to start first by defining detachment. I am, for the first time today, going live in my new iPad. This is a little bit new for me, so bear with me if I have any technical issues. Hopefully it will be better. I don't know how comments come through on this since it's brand new. So let's have fun. So let's go over what detachment is. Sorry, some children are escaping and are starting to knock on my locked door, so Dad is going to get them. Detachment, and I have it written down, so I'm sorry if I'm going to be looking off screen a little bit. Detachment is an emotional level where your emotions are no longer entwined with someone else's emotions and actions. It's a detachment from the ego and its emotional reactions and this is very important, it's not a disconnection from the core person within. It creates a gap between your emotions of individuals, thereby allowing the freedom to release and to embrace one's emotions, your own emotions, without concern of the effect that it's going to have on others, or without feeling guilty for someone else's reactions. So detachment returns the power to each personal core. Let's unpack that for a little bit, okay? So when I think of detachment, I think of a fetus, or two people with a rope attached to them, which is a fetus, right? Now, put those two people, and whenever one rope moves, the other moves, kind of like you have a rope with waves. Put those two people, separate them in between rooms. Now they're prisoners, but there's a hole in the wall, and now the rope stretches between it. They can't even see each other. Are they still attached? They're still attached by the rope. Whenever one person moves, stands up, sits down, even cries because they're shaking, the other person can feel it, and that's going to affect it. It's going to affect how close the other person can be to the wall, things like that. That is attachment. Attachment or detachment, the two sides of the coin. These are part of what I call the releasers, and it is the lowest level. Hold on a moment. I got a kid at the door again. Sorry, I am back. Dad has now locked me out from going upstairs so that they can't get back in. Let's hope it works. Okay, let's find where I was. We were talking about detachment being part of a rope, and then I went into detachment as the releasers. So it is what I think of as the lowest level of the releasers. There's detachment where you're physically attached to somebody else. Then when you detach or you no longer attached, there's letting go. Because once you detach yourself, you want to grab back on. And so the rodeo cowboy is the example I use for. The rodeo cowboy is not attached, he's holding on. So that's letting go. The highest stage is surrender. And what I say about surrender is when somebody asks, how do you know when you're surrendered? Or how do you get there? And I say, I'll tell you when I get there. Surrender to me is a little bit like the concept of relativity. They explain relativity well in science and physics class, and I'm like, oh, I get it, yes! The next day, or maybe 30 seconds later, I'm like, now what was that? And it's not that I'm dumb, but there's this aha and a light bulb, and then it kind of fades. And that's how surrender feels sometimes, or enlightenment. Good, I'm seeing questions. Thank you. Yeah, I've got your question, Melissa, and so I've got it on my list, okay? And that's a good one because it reviews what you went with last week also. So detachment, it is that lowest step. It doesn't mean it's the easiest because they're all just put detachment and letting go together. Sometimes we use those interchangeably. The other thing I want to talk about is something I said in here. It creates a gap between the emotions, thereby allowing the freedom to release. And Oh, it was a little bit ahead of that. It's not a disconnection from the core person within. Attachment, detachment, or connection, disconnection. Those are those kind of words where we could have flipped the meanings. They're all synonyms of each other a bit. So when I talk about attachment and detachment, I'm talking about from the emotions. And then when I talk about connection, disconnection, I'm talking about this emotional thing you have with a person that is on a higher spiritual level, possibly. And we could have switched that and said attachment is that meaning and disconnection, connection is the other meaning. But attachment, detachment was already in the literature. So when I wanted to detach from Chuck, I did not want to disconnect from him. I didn't want to detach so far that I became indifferent, which is a lot worse than things like hatred, because indifferent is a lack of emotions about a person not caring at all. If you hate somebody, you care a lot. You have a lot of emotional energy toward that person. Care a lot in a negative way. So you want to remain connected to that person on a spiritual or emotional, an agape, that's unconditional love type of level, on a level of grace, which is a level that, in a religious sense, you would like to have for all people. You don't want to disconnect yourself from something so that you're completely isolated and cut off. So let's go into a couple of the questions. So what can you focus on when you're trying to detach? In prep, I just quickly Googled a couple of detachment things and there was not a lot of help I found. There's detachment, the concept we use came from AA and the 12-step programs. But there's also the concept of detachment, which is still related of a very Eastern, maybe Buddhist type of detachment from material goods and detachment from things, which is very important and it's related. But what I looked up, even when I looked up emotional detachment, it was talking about emotionally detaching from your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend who's leaving. A lot of it was boyfriend, girlfriend. And what you do to move yourself on. The problem that I think most of you and I had where there's a person that's in your face and you're trying to detach from the reactions of that person. It's not just about helping yourself move on when that person isn't there interacting with you and making life difficult. Or making it easy sometimes, which confuses you because they are flirting with you and you're like confused, and then they're monstering with you and there's all this cycling going on. Where detachment, our challenge is because we're detaching from a person who is interacting with us, for many of you. Vanishers, you may still have some interactions if there's court things going on or the lack of interactions, but your detachment might be a little bit different. I don't want to say it's easier to detach in that way, because what happens when a person comes back into your life, you have to start from where the people who have closer contactors are dealing with now. And so those of you with clinging boomerangs, close contactors, you're kind of learning ahead of people who have distant contactors on the interaction portion of it. Now, the portion of it, how do you deal with them being in a different space and not contacting you at all? The distant contactors are going to be more ahead of us. So what can you focus on? You can do the things that I've talked about before. So there's a lot of meditation. And that meditation is a very big thing that helps you with detachment. And you're still going to have it in your head. You're still going to have everything that's going on in your head. But you want to get yourself some space where you can be away from your monstering or cycling or whatevering spouse, where it's still going to be in your head and bothering you, but you need to separate yourself because you don't want to be reactive. And detachment is going to help you become not reactive. But if you're standing right there in front of them, it's a lot more difficult. So you need to find some space. So let's say you're having an argument and you're having an argument and you want to react and you want to vent and go into bitch mode because they're monstering at you. What should you do? First thing, sometimes it's not bad to monster it back at them or to go bitch mode back at them. Hold on, I'll read it. Yes, that's typical. I can't push see more to see more of the comment, but that is very typical, April. I'm sorry. So, pardon me. When you go into bitch mode, telling him some of the things that it's been venting up in you and venting up in you and venting up in you, and you blow. And that's not always the worst thing to do. It's best if you can do it in a sense of where you don't lose your cool, but it might feel like you do to others. They think you are, but it's a little bit of a planned thing, because you're telling them what's going on. And here, hey, you're doing this, you're being a jerk, you're doing all these things. But the best thing to do is to go out for a walk, do something. And it might be really hard. I did this when I didn't have children. I've got 5 kids now. I don't know how I would always get away. And so you have to find some things that you can do that separate yourself from that person just for a cool down period. And then some things that can separate yourself. It's very difficult if you're with an at-home MLCer to get away. I took a lot of walks. And remember, I had one at home, not at home, at home, not at home. It was a clinging boomerang. He just returned multiple times. So when he was gone and he was not there, I spent a lot of time doing meditations. When I wasn't working, I had Sundays was set aside. I would go to church on Sundays, and I would come back, and I actually put it on my schedule that I set aside this time for me to do some journal writing and meditations. And it was a few hours a day that I set aside as this kind of focus. I created hypnotherapy tapes, and I listened to them at night when I would to fall asleep. That was very helpful. I continued to do exercising, which was getting the endorphins going and finding the runner's high. Yoga was a very good thing. Now, each one of you has to find something that works for you. And the hard part about this is it's not going to necessarily work the first time, the second time, the first month, the second month, the third month. You keep doing it. Meditation doesn't, it's not a magical solution. None of these are. So you have to be persistent about your own healing, because detachment is part of that healing that you're going to do. Sometimes you just have to find a new activity. I did art prayer dolls, and I got beads and I glued them on for me it was little gingerbread shapes. And my best friend, who was a Left Behind spouse that I met on Jim Conway's chat, Lingy, she painted rocks. She also collected rocks that were heart-shaped, the Valentine heart, but she had one that was the regular heart that she painted up like a body heart. She had hamburger rocks. She had ladybug rocks. She just painted rocks, and then she did regular paintings, and she made picture frames out of twigs. So clay is a great thing because it's working with your hands. You have to find something that can just distract your focus for a little while. And it's not easy. Trust me, and I know it's not easy. So let me flip the page because I've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to go over how long does it take to detach? There is not a set answer for that. It might take somebody 2 months. It might take somebody 3 years. Now, 2 months is probably, it's a process. You're going to get a little bit detached, and then you're going to get a little bit more, and you're going to get a little bit more, and then you're going to move back and forth. I would put it at, I would like to see you starting, in other words, moving out of the panic and anxiety that is the emergency response reaction for fight or flight. I would like to see you start moving out of that at 3 months. And if you're still in an extreme level of fight or flight at 6 months, I would like to see you getting some professional help for that. Detachment will come with that. That's when that is, I think, when you're really picking up on detachment and starting the initial stages. I would like to see you feeling more detached, but like, oh, I'm not quite there, but I'm pretty good at 18 months. 18 to 24, but really 18 months. At 3 years, I would like you to be looking back at the people who are just starting out and going, wow, I don't feel that way anymore. Wow, it's sometimes what the mentors have told me is they get to a certain stage, and I think some of them have said they think it's the 3-year mark, where they look at the newbies and they say, it's really hard for me to mentor the newbies, and some of them are slipping into mentoring people who've been in longer, because it's hard for them to go back to that place. It triggers them. So they're detached, but we're all going to get triggered from our memories. So what I think we've gone is you're going to start out at 3 months, I want you starting at moving out of your emergency fight or flight. That is called the emergency response. 6 months, if you're still in that, I would really like you to get some help. Some therapy, and hopefully you've been talking to counselors anyway, but maybe some psychiatric help. Talk to a medical professional, because that is putting trauma on your body. That shock system isn't good for you. So at 6 months, you're going to get some help if you're not feeling that. Getting out of the fight or flight or the panic and anxiety stage is going to kickstart you on the way to detachment. I think that while you're in that, the hormones are keeping you from detaching. It's just too many things going on within your mind and body for you to really have a grasp of it and be able to commit to one thing while your body's pulling you in the other direction. Then again, 18 months to 24 months, I would like to see you feeling like you're actually detached, even though you might have your moments, and you're always going to have your moments. Okay. How do you know it's healthy detachment? That's the scary thing. And this is one of the things that people fear detachment. I did. I told everyone on the divorce busting forums where I was, I don't like detachment. I just don't believe. I didn't say I didn't like it or was afraid. I said, I don't believe in it. Silly. And I talked to Jim Conway and I was explaining it to him, and he said, well, why don't you use the word surrender instead? And that's what I did, and it worked. It worked, because it was just replacing one word with another, but I was doing the same concept. And the reason I didn't want detachment, and it was because some people had told me, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? We're afraid that detachment will mean it's over, that it'll change our heart. We're afraid it'll change our heart. You are also afraid that it will change how they perceive you. If I am distancing myself, and this was one of the questions, if I'm distancing myself, are they going to think that I'm not interested, that I don't care? Are they going to think I've changed my mind? Are they going to think that I'm accepting of this? And I'll tell you what, they might. And you cannot live your life fearing what someone else, especially your midlifer, is going to, how they're going to react or how they're going to interpret your actions. And you can reassure them and say, this is called detachment. So this isn't like a poker game where you don't show your hand. You say, this is called detachment, and I had to do this to emotionally protect myself. And what's going on is I'm not distancing myself from you. I'm not trying to disconnect from you. I am trying not to react to your emotions. I'm not. You have to find the right words for your person, because they might monster back at you just for saying hello or anything. But it is okay to explain to them, because if you have a clinging boomerang, they like to be reassured, hey, you are still there and you do still care, but you're going to change your behaviors, and you're going to be more healthy with your interactions with them. Just when they go, well, I just think you don't care anymore. And I'm like, I'm sorry you feel that way. You know, that you can think that it's not true. I would rather you even said, you and I both know that isn't true. Then you're making a factual statement about whether that's true or not. And sure, they can refute it in your head, but you're not saying, I don't think that's true. You know, I don't think you think that. You're making it stated as though they know for a fact you do care. And it works a little bit better that way. So, detaching with clinging boomerangs, yes. I have trouble with detaching because I have a clinging boomerang that feels like he must contact me daily without having been in physical contact, but only through email, phone, that sort of contact. And it's hard to know when and how to detach. Okay, so the when is always. So detachment is an important barrier we put up, and that's maybe not a good word, but you use it with your children, or you should. So my kids came to the door and they were very upset, and I had to just stay a little bit neutral with them and say, no, you need to go out. And one of the children was Jeremiah. It's good he didn't come in here because he wasn't dressed. And he has a little bit of a temper. He's in counseling for it, and he gets very upset. And I have to just say, Jeremiah, you know what? you can go over there and you can scream, not while we're doing a live, but you can go over there and you can go into that corner, or you can go up to this room, or you can go out on the deck and you can scream if you want. But I have work to do and I'm going to go over here. And I don't always, sometimes I get reactive, I'm a human, react to him and say, oh my God, what are you doing? This is ruining my life. Which might be what you want to do. Or you might just want to yell at them, can't you just stop? Well, no, they can't stop. And it's the same thing with your spouse. They are caught in their midlife crisis. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop taunting you, especially if they see that it works. They're not going to stop monstering if you keep reacting back because you're giving them something to monster back to. And when you do detach, they're going to try to monster because they're going to try to get you to come back to the reactive person you've been. So you can feel like, oh, this detachment isn't working on them because they're still monstering. I mean, yes, they're still trying to reel you back in. Your test is that whether you're getting reeled back in or not. Yes, you want to hear from them, and it gives you all this hope. So it is hard to detach when you have a clinging boomerang because, hey, it's all these cookie crumbs. They're great. You know that they still care. They want to hear that you still care. But are you showing that you don't care? No, you're not showing you don't care. And you just have to separate yourself. You're going to take those communications and talk to him as you can, or email him if you must. Be gentle, and then when you're separated from him, deep breaths, let it out. Be reassured that he is still contacting you. And then you want to wonder why. Well, why is he not coming over? It's not time. He's not ready for that. And if you're feeling like you're having trouble detaching, you're not ready for it. Your children aren't ready for it. They want to see him, but they're not ready for the emotional ups and downs that are going to come from that. It's hard enough when you have a clinging boomerang who says he wants to be out but can't stand not being with you. And you set up boundaries. And you have to stick to them. And I was not good at sticking to a lot of boundaries, but it still worked. So you have to forgive yourself when you don't. So part of detachment is putting up boundaries. So I want you to go learn about boundaries. And some of that is, you know what? I'm sorry that I didn't answer your call when it came in, but I am not going to be attached to the telephone and answer every time it rings or every time I see you. Sometimes I'm busy, and it's not personal. And that's what you're saying to them. It's not personal that I didn't answer when you called. I was changing a diaper. I was doing dishes. I was driving. I was just tired, and I didn't want to answer the phone. I didn't hear the phone because it was stuck in the couch because the kids hit it. You don't have to be constantly jumping through the hoops to get to them because you want to hear those cookie crumbs, or because you think that they are going to get a different idea of what's going on because you're not being responsive in a timely manner, what they consider to be a timely manner. You wait. They text you. Wait a few minutes, a few hours, or a few days, depending on the text. Same thing with emails, with voicemails, with phone calls. You determine whether you want to answer it or not. And when they get mad at you, you just say, I'm sorry. I have a life. You left. And I have a life, and I'd love for you to be in it, but I am not going to drop everything to cater to your requirements for that life. Okay, we've got a couple more questions on another page here, so let me look them over for a moment. Okay, struggling with detachment because you have a monstering spouse who says that you're not an item anymore. We talked about the right of wife and the right of husband last week, where when your spouse says, you know, we're done, and it's especially when they're not in the house, but I know this one is in the house, which makes it especially difficult. But your spouse has given up that, taken away your right of wife, right of husband, which is the right to say, hey, you know what? You really need to come home at 2 a.m. or before 2 a.m. You need to call before if you're going to be late. You need to do these things because they're respectful. They're things that we do in a relationship to respect the other person. You lose that right. I'm going to click on my light for a moment too. I think I'm losing power on it, but that'll be fine. So what can you do? How do you deal with the knowing there's nothing you can do about this not being an item? And you're right. There's nothing you can do with it. In this case, your husband or wife, and in this case, it's wife, but this would place to all of you. They want out. They are still at enough of the beginning, because this particular case may have been 13 months since bomb drop. But if the person is still at home, the MLCer is still at home, they have not gotten out. She has not gotten out to her goal. Her goal is to not be in the marriage. Now, instead of saying that as divorce, say that as her goal is to not be in the marriage, even if you are gone for long periods. But you're still living in the same household, even if you're gone in this case. But in most cases, it's an at-home MLC with both people. She hasn't escaped. She hasn't gotten out, not so she can learn that the grass isn't greener or that, because they're not really going to learn that very fast. That might take a few years in this sort of case. But it's just, there's this whole idea, and she is not going to let it go until it happens. And then she has to experience it happening. She is set on one single goal of getting out of the marriage. And as you said, she won't stop until she's out of the marriage. So, I'm going to keep reading. So these continuing monstering as they cycle through, they do catch you off. They catch you off guard, and you move backwards in your own detachment. And sometimes get reactive, and that is very difficult. And that's where I was with it, because I had an at-home MLCer, and then he'd leave. But then he'd be at home for 3 months, 6 months, a whole year. And then he was gone again. So I had those breaks. But during the period where they're living with each other, it's every day. And there were periods of time where I got to separate myself by going to work. And then work got really bad because he would call me constantly while I was at work. And that's why I had time in the hot tub. I would put a timer on. Since I had to be at work, I put timer on for 15 minutes. And I required myself to stay in for at least that 15 minutes so I could be in there as a 15-minute hot tub meditation. And I didn't have to close my eyes. I had my chamomile tea. So I was trying to do things that were calming. I don't do caffeine anyway because I will go crazy because I'm already hyperactive. So everything, and things that can help you be calm. Calmer people, if you are on a level of calm, you are going to naturally be more responsive than reactive. So, no, you have to accept the process of MLC, though. And when you say, well, how is it that she tells you we're not an item and there's nothing you can do about it? You have to say, that's right. I'm sorry to tell you, there's nothing you can do about it. She wants out. She's going to get out. It's not going to really, you can't start to change it and improve it until you change it. You can't change her until she gets the thing she's trying to get. And then we'll see. And then your detachment process is going to change a little bit, because you won't always have that in your face. You might have her still telling you we're not an item and the right of husband is gone. But she's not going to be in your face all the time reminding you of this. You have to accept, sorry, it's going to happen. That doesn't mean a divorce is going to happen or not. But most MLCers leave the house eventually. Women tend to stay in the house longer as at-home MLCers. Men leave faster because women stay with the children. Women stay with the house. They don't want to leave the house, whereas men, well, they kind of get that it's me leaving. It's me who wants out of the marriage, so I'll walk out of the house also. Whereas women, well, I shouldn't leave my house. I'm a stay-at-home parent and all of that, which is understandable. Just, it's not fair to both parties. None of it's fair. How do you deal with pushing away the feelings of resentment and not going into victim mode? Yes. I'm going to go back to the same answers. And, if you continue to have problems with this, that's where I did the hypnotherapy. And to me, meditation and hypnotherapy is a deep form of meditation with some specific actions embedded into it. And you can do that within a meditation as well. And that's not, hypnotherapy especially isn't for everybody. But it helps you to be calm. And when you do hypnotherapy, I really recommend that you get an audio session done so that And I mean, you get it on audio, MP3, whatever kind of format, so that you can re-listen to this over and over and over again. Like I said, I went to sleep with them. It's doing all of those things that separate your mind from the activity of what's going on at home. So again, it's the yoga, it's the exercise. These mindfulness things, I know I'm repetitive with them, but they were what was key for me in getting through this. And I started them quickly. It took me a long time to really be detached. I have no idea how long, because it was cycling in and out and in and out and in and out. But to start my detachment, March was bomb drop, and I was probably starting that detachment well at summer when he left, and even before that. And some of the start was it really came with my knowing, which was about 6 weeks, because that helped me calm down and stop worrying about it. I still had freak out, but that helped me believe we were going to get through it. Now I was worried about, well, how do I handle these things? And how do I, when it happens, how do I respond and react, and not react to him? Is it okay sometimes if I react to him? Sometimes he wanted me to react to him, not because he was trying to escalate an argument, but because he needed the reassurance that I still cared. And remember that indifference is this level here. And detachment is not indifference. But can it get you to there? If you detach yourself from it. If you disconnect from it as well. Yeah, it can. And so you do want to be careful that you stay connected. And that's one of the reasons I really like the mindfulness. Because when I was doing my meditations, sometimes I meditated on things that were, I'm going to do a bead meditation, like similar to a rosary and prayers. But I also meditated and I did affirmations, focusing on Chuck and reminding myself of what he was to me. And for me, what he was to me was sweetheart. And I called him sweetheart. And we are not people who are into endearments. But I started doing it then as a reminder, because the other things we wanted to call him aren't very nice. I think last week I talked about why I refer to the OW, other woman, other man, as an alienator. And some of it's gender neutral, but it's also not derogatory. If I can insult one person, I can insult many people. Disrespect for one human is disrespect for another. And no, I don't like the alienator. She's not my friend. I don't respect her actions. But this is going to go the same thing with detachment. Helps you to not take all of these things personally. Hold on a moment. I'm going to continue to look over. How do you not become a doormat? Because you want your family together. So this is another one of those. You want to jump through so many hoops when your spouse is going out, because you think, well, if I do this, it'll make a difference. If I'm nice to her, if I do what she has asked or what he has asked. Several times Chuck would say, well, if you'd just done this, and sometimes he said it after his midlife crisis was over. Sometimes he said it during, like, if you just give me he said this one, I'm sure many of you have heard it, if you just give me a divorce, maybe we'll get back together again then. If you do what I want now, if you let me go sleep with this other woman, I'll come home. Really? I mean, it gets so absurd. But if you say yes to that, oh, sure, I'll let you sleep with her. That's being a doormat. And so you set up these boundaries. You set up, no, that's not appropriate. And then they test the boundaries. And they are going to test them just like 2-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 13-year-olds to see at what point you will break those boundaries. And this is especially true of somebody who is a high energy replayer. Sometimes they laugh while they're doing it and to see it and taunt you while they're doing it. And you have to sit back and say, you know what, that's not appropriate. I'm going to walk away now. I'm going to hang up the phone now. The very last few months of Chuck's crisis, it was a return to this high energy replaying behavior. I don't even want to call it cycling. It was very deliberate. He was intentional in how he was trying to taunt me. And if you've read the literature, you may have noticed or seen where, yes, this is very common that at the very end they go back to revisit these types of stages for a little while, just to shut the doors on them, but also to test you. Once they come, they go into the midlife crisis tunnel. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, so they can still see a little bit clearly. Then they get in and things get bad, things get dark, things get all these, but they're not cycling as much possibly because there's not the confusion of normal interacting with crazy. Now they are approaching the end of the tunnel. The same thing happens. They are now at the point where they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So normal is outside, new life is outside, which is also scary. Is it going to work? But normal is interacting with crazy once again, and so they're cycling again, and they do all this testing to see how it's going to work. And at that point, detachment, I think I must have had it well at that point. I had a plan for how we were going to get through it. I didn't know how we were going to activate that plan completely, but the plan for us was, you cannot come home, we can't be together for 12 months or for a year from the time you leave the next time. And I knew he was going to get ready to leave. And I remember coming home and he was in the hot tub, and I was wearing this lovely skirt it was a skirt that a scarf that I'd wrapped into a skirt, and I was still down in my weight, and I was a former model, a petite model, and I know, no offense, I know I looked great, and I sat on the edge of the hot tub and I flirted with him, and I just took it because I knew what he was doing. And so in that, I don't think you should do that in the beginning because you're not ready for it. You're not prepared for it. When there's the hyper sex in the beginning, if you don't know that that's normal, you might be confused by the mixed messages. I did the hyper sex thing in the beginning because I knew I was going to be creating the oxytocin and the bonding and helping us for what was going to happen later. That's the same thing that was going on here. I just decided, you know what? I can do this now. I'm just going to toy with him a little bit. And I don't know how to flirt, but apparently both of us, he was a completely different person than he normally is. And there were aspects of that person that were very, were positive, let's say. Because Monster in Chuck was a very more forceful personality. He was not demanding so much as he was more in charge. And he's not an in charge type person. I am. But, and I don't mean he took charge of me, but he was more confident. And so if he could have taken the qualities of Monster and applied them positively, they were great qualities, some of them. And so this, even the flirting and the way he was smiling, but I knew it was just teasing, and so I teased him back. Now, if Chuck had remarried, would you have been a covenant keeper? I was 32 and a half at bomb drop. I had no children. Back then, I used a religious platform and it got me caught in a double bind, because by the time he was cake eating, he's like, well, I know you won't because you're religious and you can't go back on that, and you're using these reasons. And I stayed with that reason, but it did create problems for me as well, because to him it gave him the reason he could keep leaving, because he could always come back. And so I had to flip it a little bit and try to mix it up and scare him in that. I don't think I would have gone the whole level of covenant keeping because of my age and that I didn't have children. I actually had an insane, although maybe it wasn't insane, maybe it was logical plan. And the plan I made probably came before he even moved out of the house in the first 2 weeks after bomb drop. I was 32 and a half. We'd been planning to start having children at any point. And he used that as the bomb drop. Oh, I don't want children anymore. And I think you can all, knowing that we have 5 adopted children now, that was just an excuse to get out. So I said, okay, you're not supposed to date or anything until 1 year after a divorce is final. Not after bomb drop, but after a divorce is final. That was the professional advice. So I put that in. I'm going to say, okay, let's see, how long do I stand? If I stand and he really does divorce me, how long after a divorce till I might be standing, but till I open it to other fish in the sea? 1 year. And then how long is it going to take me to meet somebody? What if it takes, let's say, 1 to 2 years to meet somebody? And then, well, you have to date them for 2 to 3 years before you marry. And so I had this all lined out. So I got myself to 39 and a half. I got 7 years out before I think that I was even going to be able to have children with somebody else. And I was rushing that. And that was also at the time, if nothing has happened by that age, I look into adoption or in vitro fertilization. I had ways to move on, and I wasn't sure if I would be a covenant keeper at the beginning or not, but I just don't think it would have worked out that way for me. If I would have met somebody, I might not have. I just don't think I would have been because of my age. Now, we have covenant keepers who are in there, have been married for 40 years when bomb drop comes. I think of that as like my grandma. My grandma, no, she wasn't a covenant keeper. Grandpa and grandma were married for 45 years. And then when grandpa died, grandma didn't go out looking for somebody. Maybe if she'd found somebody and that it just happened, it would have happened. But when she was in her 70s, she didn't feel the need to go fulfill that. And nobody complained about her not going and finding a man. But we think about that with women in their 40s. And I think I probably would. I wouldn't know how to do it, but that's the same position all the other people are in, right? You don't necessarily know how when you've been married for 20, 30, even 40 years. I just don't think I would have been a covenant keeper. Okay, let me look and see if there's any more. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about not being a doormat. Okay, because that's a very important one. If you are going to do everything they ask you, then you're probably being a doormat. You have to determine, sometimes you even have to say no to things that just so that they can learn there's a boundary, even if you wanted to do it. So Chuck was always asking me to go biking. And I finally realized I was enabling, and I was using excuses. I said, one of my excuses was, I think he's moved stages from replay to depression. He had not moved stages. He wasn't even close to having moved stages, but it gave me an excuse to go out and be with him. And this was a year in. There was no way he'd moved stages. So sometimes you just have to, I put up the no contact saying, you know what, I don't think this is helping us. I think I'm giving myself too much of you. And so he wasn't going to change what I'm giving myself. He was having his me fix. If they are asking you, especially with our wives asking you to do all sorts of household chores, especially ones that you wouldn't normally do, and are they not doing them? And when you start to feel used and things aren't changing in how their attitude is, and they're not going to right now in midlife crisis, they're probably not going to, you're probably being a doormat. If you're doing everything they want, or if you are catering to them to enable having their affair, and I think I used this example last week, and I think this is probably more common with women, but I've talked to a few people who've had it, both women and men, saying, should I just let her go tell her she can go off and have that affair for a while and get it out of her system? No. They're going to do it anyway. Don't do it with your blessing or permission. This isn't Ross and Rachel. We're on a break from Friends. This is marriage, and adultery, infidelity, affairs are going to be set up by you as wrong. But at the same time, they're also set up as, you're going to do what you're going to do, and I can't stop you. That doesn't mean it's okay. That doesn't mean I approve of it. That doesn't mean I'm letting you go. It means I can't control you. So what Lingy did, and I think I might have gone over this last week, I was telling someone else about it. Lingy, I love her to death. Bless her heart. She's been gone for 10 years. But her husband was left for the first few months and then was at home for the next 5 years and then left again for the last year. And the last year means that Lingy died. She was 59 and a half and she wasn't well. So one day, she knew he was planning on leaving. He kept going on ski trips. His big thing, and I think he may have been this way a little bit before midlife crisis, but he was an obsessive exerciser during midlife crisis. He did hikes, long weekend hikes, mountain climbing, and ski weekends. And those were his biggies. And he was going on one of those. And probably the alienator was going to be there. She often was. And Lingy was standing at the kitchen and probably at the sink, and there was a window right outside. And the bedroom was right up above them. in the next story with the window stacked on top of the kitchen window. She's standing there and suddenly luggage starts dropping out the window. Yes, he was trying to hide that he was going somewhere. I mean, won't she figure it out when he doesn't come home for a few days? Or hide what was in those bags? And when this happened, Lingy didn't confront him on it. She didn't call him on it. She probably went out and kissed him goodbye. And then she'd call and told me. And we were both shocked and like, he seriously did that. But that Lingy was allowing herself to be a doormat because both of them, she and her husband, both knew that Lingy knew about the affair. So she knew about it and he knew she knew about it. And yet they were still playing this game, and that's what it is to be a doormat. And I feel terrible calling her that because she was such a vibrant lady. But she got stuck because she was so afraid that he would leave that she didn't call him on these things until every few months there would be a blow up. He'd say he'd leave her, he'd come home, they'd go on a vacation, and then it would have to start all over again. That's the doormat. How do you keep yourself from being that? It is going to be a bit easier when you aren't in the same household. Okay? You want your family back together? Well, the way you get your family back together is counterintuitive. You don't give in to their demands. You do listen to them. You listen because they have valid complaints. And I think one of the biggest and most confusing things we hear is don't believe anything they say. Or some of it is believe 50% of what they say. Some of it nothing what they say, 50% of what they do. And that can be a big mistake if you don't believe anything they say, because you shouldn't dismiss their complaints because some are valid and you don't want to dismiss things. I was neglectful. That was a very valid complaint Chuck had. He was right. I knew it. As soon as bomb drop happened, I know what the problem is. It's this. To me, it was glaringly obvious. So you listen to them. But you don't give in to everything they say because they're going to use threats. Well, if you do this, I'll stay. If you do this, I'll stay. If you do this, I'll stay. When you give in to those threats and ultimatums, you're on the doormat, wearing footprint patterned clothing. And yeah, she might resort to those tactics, and he might resort to those tactics. They all are going to. Your job is to remember what I said, or I try and say each week. The thing you need to do as a standard to get to reconciliation, and it's not a guarantee, the same things you have to do if you decide, I am not standing for this marriage, I do want out, or I wish it hadn't come to this, but given the circumstances, I want out. I am to survive and thrive and have a divorce, same thing, same actions. It's detachment. It's this mindfulness. It's maintaining your heart. That's what detachment and mindfulness is going to do. It's going to maintain your heart because you don't want to become an angry person. You don't want to become a resentful person. You don't want to go into victim mode. When you're blaming other people for your actions, you're in victim mode. When you're blaming other people for how you feel, you're in victim mode. And yes, it's hard because this other person is doing actions that are causing you to choose actions. And some of that, especially in the beginning where we have the emergency response, is physiological. You go through shock, panic, and anxiety, and it's a physiological response, which is why I said your detachment probably is not going to start until after that period is over. And if you're stuck in it, you need medical and therapeutic intervention. Okay, I'm going to look and see. I think I've covered most of the questions, but I'm going to see if there's a couple more. Okay, so we're going to wrap up, and if you have any more detachment questions, we can continue this on another topic. We won't go on the same topic next week, but we can continue. This is my favorite topic. Yes, agreed, Monique. This detachment is key to self-preservation, and that's what I want to really get you guys to understand, is detachment is the most important tool in your toolbox. So in the email that I sent announcing this Facebook Live, I did send a link to the detachment series on the main site. So go and catch up on there. It also has practical applications to detachment. And I will see you next week. Thank you, and